Well, here I am with the Shogun. We bought this on the weekend update number 2 video the other day. The guy brought it out, went to buy some other 600 parts. He brought this out and had a full 600 arabesque group on it. It was a little crusty, the whole frame's a little crusty, a little rust. Just some ugly surface rust, you know, nothing actually structural serious yet. Nowhere near it really. And so we pulled the 600 group off and sold it, and doubled our money. Won only $60 for this thing. So that was great. But I have this frame and it's about my size. Let's double check that. So all Japanese frames measure from the center of the bottom bracket to about the top of the top tube. Not really the lug. Some guys measure the top of the lug. Frame builders measure center to center, but the old bikes really measure just to the top of this tube, and it's about a 57. It's about 56 center to center. Top tubes, you measure center to center, center of this lug to center of this lug. And it is like crazy, man. It's like a 54. So this bike is exactly the right height and really stubby. So I can actually use a long stem on this bike. Maybe even some bull horns, which would be cool. I'll probably use some risers. I wanted to make a real simple single speed. And some easy to hop on and ride. Something would be good for taking on the Greyhound. You can take a bike on there. We have to take the pedals off and turn the bars. All my bikes have baskets and cruiser bars, and it seems a little obnoxious. I might do it anyways, but a nice single speed would really be the way to be. I've already checked, like, this bike being so rusty and crusty, nothing is frozen. Like these screws are usually frozen or bent. They're like perfect and fine. It has eyelets on the back for some reason, but not the fork. That's ridiculous, Shogun. Next, we're going to really inspect this frame, because it is a little rusty and crusty. I've seen a lot of really rusty frames ride for decades and never have a problem. I've seen a few, like I had this old Trek one, had a little bit of a rust line around here, like, yeah, it's probably fine, who knows. Stay popped right out immediately. I've seen the down tube pop out of old Treks. I think those old stoners back in the 70s making those Treks just forgot to braze some joints, honestly. I've seen a few other bikes where there's no brazing material at all and things just pop out. Like, looking at this bottom bracket, I can't see any silver or brass get full penetration on any of these joints, which is pretty common on old bikes. There's an old Raleigh video on YouTube, I don't know if you've seen it, where they're just hammering, the lugs are so tight, just hammering the tubes into lugs, and they have molten vats of brass. And just dipping the entire joint in the molten brass and just hoping it heats up enough and flows all the way through and pulls it out. And they just hang them up. Like, they're not brazing at all. And really, when you braze, you want the tube to be a nice loose slip fit to where you can sort of stick it in the lug and it'll hold there, it won't fall out on its own. You can kind of shake it or twist it, it slips right out. So it's a barely tight slip fit. And then you braze, you heat up with a torch the whole lug all around the tube, get a little on the tube, try and get on the inside, and you add a little silver or brass, and you heat it around, and you want it to be even, and you want the brass and silver to follow the heat. So you want to be able to see it flow all the way inside the lug and flow all the way inside the tube. So you can see it join all the way around and see it come all the way through. And that's why frame builder bikes are often nicer than production bikes, because they really care and pay attention. Often, I say, because a lot of frame builders are really amateur and don't know what they're doing and do really terrible jobs, and a lot of the early bikes break. So they're trying to make everything too sexy and sleek. So I mean, these look good, there's no rust. And even this tube's got surface rust. It's really on the corner where the paint's chipped. It doesn't really look like it's in the joint. No, I can see paint in the joint. Same thing with this tube. It's just a little bit of surface rust, it's fine. A smart person would sandblast this and have it repainted. Really get all that rust off. You really do want to sandblast, or worst case wire wheel. You don't want to use sandpaper. That will take the rust off, but it actually pushes some of the rust deeper in the metal and it'll come right back up and start bubbling through your new paint or whatever kind of right away. So honestly, I think it's fine. I don't think it's sketchy. I'm going to ride it. Wish I had front eyelets. Paint is shit enough, even though it's mostly here and kind of cool. This is something I really might braze some eyelets or some rack mounts on. Be really cool, but I'll probably use a little walled basket or or a tiny rack, or Maybe even something dorky and roady like a Ortlieb, like, you know, quick fix, little front pannier, handlebar bag kind of thing. We'll see. We'll see what I find for sale cheap. Easy. So it looks pretty nice. I'll probably put the seat post back in first. So when I pulled this bike apart, the seat post came out, it was a little scuffed up, and I didn't film it, but I just took a file and knocked off any little burrs, and it took some sandpaper and buffed it out. So it just has kind of an even, uniform brush finish. Kind of makes it a little less scruffy looking. And it's the old Japanese 26/8 size, which is real common on a lot of their high-end bikes. 27 is a little common on some of the really high-endy stuff. 27.2 is not so much on Japanese stuff. That's really like a Columbus Tubes and Reynolds 531 tubes thing. And when I went to take the head off, get the saddle off, this old bolt just snapped. It was mangled. Looked like people put pliers on it, and so that saddle was stuck on there for a while. But I went to the hardware store, and I found a bolt that's about all the right things. A few threads shorter, because everything on bikes is a weird size. Either that or something way too long, probably stab the bottom of my saddle. And you can cut them and you can grind them, and try shorter first. To guesstimate how this goes back on. The bottom toothed cradle fits this bottom toothed cradle. Sometimes they have arrows or some other sort of directional mark for reasons. Sometimes they do not. This one looks pretty uniform. And the top looks pretty identical too, so it probably goes on either way. It's got this big giant square. I've already checked these threads and they seem fine. They match up. I took the old bolt with me and made sure it matched up, and I really made sure the head fits inside the body. Definitely found this when you need a proprietary bike hardware to fit in, because a lot of modern bolts, the head's too fat and won't actually fit. So that was the start. Oh, that was a huge mistake. So whatever caused these scratches is still there. I was going to clean this tube out. Better late than never. Take a little half-round file. I'm going to find any of these burrs, and they're usually on the seat slot itself. Just little sharp, hard edges. And I can see inside here this thing's got paint in it and stuff. Usually after paint I'll clean out a seat tube. Right it with a file, and then we're going to play with these cool tools I got at the last little tool buying what's in the hose. So these are flex hones, and every one of these little balls is like sandpaper, basically, a little abrasive. So you really get inside, put it on a drill and spin, and really clean and get any burrs gone. So a real big fat one for modern-y oversized bike tubes, this little guy. Just right for 27.2 and slightly tighter. So I've got a little half-round file, so it kind of fit inside the shape of the tube. And I can just see if I can find any of those burrs, especially up here. I'm kind of going around the whole outside lip, because that's usually where it is, all around the top and in that slot. This guy in. That's probably enough. And it shot a lot of dirt and grease out this seat binder slot. I took most of that paint off, so that flex hone's still real sharp. Those flex hones are like 10 or 15 bucks on eBay. Or you can pay like 40 bucks for 27.2 one, but you don't need one. Like an 1.1 one is fine. Best way to tell for sure is to stick the old seat post in, see if it gouges the crap out of it. The other side actually gouged the crap out of it. This is probably from this vent hole in here. I mean, it didn't actually gouge the crap, it barely left any marks at all, which is about par for the course. You can't really get these things perfect without like an actual reamer to go through first. When I was doing frames, I had a 27.2 dedicated reamer, and we ran it through all of our frames. After brazing, because the heat can warp things slightly, so we really want that clean, 27.2 perfectly. And then usually after powder coat too, because powder coat is thick and gets in holes and threads and things, and I always recommend doing a full frame prep after a powder coat, and really I'll do it after paint too, but like whatever. All right. So seat post is prepped. The other side just spinning. F minus. So the other side's like one of those weird little dudes that's almost like a chainring bolt. So here's the back of a chainring bolt. As you can see, it says two little weird slots. They make a little chainring bolt tool that grabs them, but this thing's like a miniature version of that. And all I need is a special little tool I do not have. Sometimes you can take like a V-brake brake nut. So your standard V-brakes just have like a little threaded nut on the back. It's usually M6, which is about what seat post binder bolts are. But it sticks out a little bit and it has regular wrench flats for like an Allen wrench in it instead of some stupid little fake chainring bolt tool. So often in old frames, old Miatas, Mitsubishis, Univegas, like stuff that, stuff that has this weird proprietary stuff, you can really get away with this trick. And no one taught me that. I figured it out the hard way. A lot of old guys are always freaking out about seat post binder bolts and how that frame wasn't any good, and like this simple little thing just totally worked. I'm sure other guys figured it out too. I was happy and proud of myself to figure that one out. So I'm going to take this little 50-cent screwdriver I just got. I'm going to hold it in there and see if I can get this thing to bite. Because once it bites, it cinches right up, no problem. Don't even need the fancy tool. So that worked great. Otherwise, we'd be going to that V-brake nut. Next, we're going to check the rear spacing. So old vintage frames, a lot of them were 120 for a long time. Some weird stuff's a little smaller. 126 became really, really common with cassette bodies and some like 5 and 6 speed freewheels, like 6 speed freewheels. And then they went 130 with modern road stuff, and they went wider with boost and disc brake and all that weird nonsense. But let's check the old 120. We could just measure it, but I do happen to have these wheels and I made sure we're round and true and bearing adjusted correctly. Let's see what it says. I'm going to say it's probably 126. Yeah. So a gap on both sides. And it definitely fits 23s. Bet you I can get 28s in here. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. A little squeeze. So we have two choices. Well, we have three choices. The worst choice, and the most common one, is to just put it in here, just tighten these nuts down, just flex that frame under tension, and then, you know, in 6 months or a year, we'll snap the seat stay. And everyone will be like, oh, that's weird. Why seat stays and old bikes break? They're dumb. No, it's because you pinch the frame and it's under tension the whole time, and then you're riding it and bumping it under tension. And turns out that's stupid. Another thing is, on a lot of bikes, you can just pull the lock nut off and stick a spacer. You get like a chainring bolt slash axle hub spacer kit from Wheels Manufacturing, or steal some off something else, and you put a 3mm one on each side. This is all one big giant thing on the axle, so to put on the far inside should be fine. But honestly, I kind of just want to bend this frame and show cold setting of frames, so that's what we're going to do. The best thing to do would be take a Park frame and fork alignment gauge. And it's a long gauge that'll touch the head tube and the seat tube, and then come out and have a little adjustable end so you can check the dropout. You can flip it to the other side and make sure the little adjustable end's touching both sides the same. It's just like dishing a wheel to make sure that it's centered. But sometimes it'll be sticking way out over here, and you're like, oh, this frame needs to come out, or oh, this side has to come in to make it the correct spacing. So instead of doing that, we've been using the string trick with a string wrapped around the frame and then measuring off the string to the seat tube. Okay, so this isn't actually string, it's a piece of wire. I just have an alligator clip on the end. These are great, cheap at any hardware store. Wrap it around the head tube. And we're going to wrap it around the dropout somehow, some way. I guess I'll use adjuster screws. Now often these old dropouts weren't very even, so that could be a slight issue. But you know, we'll work with what we have. Try and pull it pretty taut, alligator clip it up, You roll it up to make it tauter. So now it's pretty taut. Got just like a little measuring gauge in millimeters. I'm going to run that against the string and put it up against the seat tube. So I got 35 millimeters on this side. And it looks like exactly 35, 36 on the other side. This side might be out a little farther, or maybe there's some funkiness going on with the dropouts, and I could take a bunch of measurements and see. But this side's maybe a millimeter or two out farther. I'm going to see if we can cold set this dude the hard way. Just going to pinch it. If I was at the frame builder shop, I'd bolt the bottom bracket on top of a frame alignment table and bend both sides one at a time and measure them and try and get this thing centered, but just going to give it a little pinch. Some old bikes really pinch easy, some are big pains in the butt. Definitely moved some. You got this real pro measuring tape and measure the inside dropout to the inside dropout. Oh, I'm right at 120 now. So it moved 6 millimeters, exactly what I wanted. First try. You know, getting a good feel for this stuff. I've done it a zillion times, so. But now, did it move on one side or both sides equally? I doubt. Let's measure both sides again. So I'm at like 25, 6, 7, 8, like 29. To hide that wire in the front. Whoa! And this side is still like 35. So the drive side came in the full 6, and this side didn't come in at all, which is unideal. So we'll try and push just this side in, and we'll try and pull this side out. By the big frame alignment thing, it'd be a lot easier. Sometimes you can hold it or push it or put your body up against it. Just trying to move this side. Stupid park stand's in the way. Also, being 3 millimeters out of whack is not going to affect anything. And maybe I should put the wheel in first and see if it sits straight. Because 3 millimeters is nothing. And the wheel sits perfectly straight. And eyeball the side of the rim all the way up to the side of the tube. So if it was, I've seen bikes like an inch out and have to bend them. I've seen bikes this far out and nothing. It's a little tighter than the 120, so I'm going to give this one just a little push. I really do find that holding one side and pushing one side will make that one side push. And this is the one that bent in easier, so we know it'll probably move out easier. It's just a little push. Hoping it'll move like 8 millimeter tops. Yeah, just enough to where the wheel kind of sits in on its own. You can sort of force it out, so it's barely. It's like 121. We're going to call that good. So that is a basic, easy, lazy cold setting. We're going to check the fork. I feel like I remember this fork being tweaked when I checked it before. Yes, it is definitely smaller than 100. The wheel does not want to go right in. I do push it all the way up and in. Maybe a slightly bigger gap over on this side. It's too tight, so I guess this blade's probably have to come out a little bit. I did do a video on aligning a fork with just like a flat glass table. And it's not super fun. But we do have the little park fork alignment tool, so we're going to pull this fork out and align it. This nut's already loose from when I pulled the bike before, make sure it wasn't frozen. This headset's real gross and crusty, but it does feel pretty smooth and nice. I'm debating on using it or popping a different headset in. So we'll see. I'm guessing it's JIS. I'm not sure if any of the other headsets I have are JIS, which is the old Japanese industrial standard, which I think is a nickname for JIS, which actually meant something different, but people started using it so much they actually say it's Japanese industrial standard now. And they also made ISO, which was a slightly different size, and they're not interchangeable. So you have to know if you're, the easiest way to tell is if your crown race is 27 millimeters or 26.4, which is so annoying, like bar clamps being 26.0 or 25.4. It's very difficult to measure. Most cheap calipers you can get aren't accurate enough. These ones, these cheap Pittsburgh ones, are shockingly accurate enough. I'm blown away about the 5 sets. The other ones are. So we can hammer this guy off and measure it, but this is like early 80s or maybe even late 70s Japanese stuff. I'm betting it's JIS. ISO is usually American-made stuff, 90s stuff. Italian stuff is basically ISO, except for it has Italian threaded top, where most ISO stuff is English threaded stuff. So, you know, bikes. People are always like, how do I know what's compatible? You're like, well, you gotta play with a lot of bikes. Really measure a lot of stuff and see what's compatible, because so much is and so much is not. So that's a problem for 10 minutes from now, us. We're gonna do this fork first. So this is that Park fork alignment gauge again. I did a video on a little while ago to sort of mocking it up and sort of showing you how it works, and now we can do it for reals. This is unideal because my little closet is so cluttered. It's likely you don't have one of these. It's likely you won't find one. Really call around and look. Find some shops, some gruffy old guys. Or maybe even go on Craigslist, see some old bike nerds out there have one. Shops with old guys that have a lot of old bikes will probably have one of these. Your big non-profits, your bike kitchens and microwaves and bikeuses and stuff like that will likely have one. So what you do is just kind of set it inside. It's for 1 inch only. Bring this guy down to about the crown, or usually right where the blades go before the crown, or right on the crown. The crown's a little tapered, so I'm going to go right down to the blades. Make sure they're touching on both sides, right up at the crowns. We know this is square and straight, and we can come down the line this square and straight. We can tighten this guy down. Need to get a knob. Then we're going to go to the dropouts. These guys are spaced for weird earlier stuff. These outside lines are exactly 100, so I kind of want the outside lines. I'm going to stick this in the dropouts. I want the outside lines to like show. And of course I need this to be all the way in. Forgot about that, this thing. It's like barely made to size. You really almost have to take the crown race off. Almost. Try that again. Touching both blades. So we know it's straight in here. All the way to the end. Slide right up into these dropouts. So we can see this blade is in too far. You can only see one of these little notches. We want to see all three. And this blade is also in slightly too far. You want to see two of those notches. You want to see that one. So I'm going to have to pull this blade some, pull this blade some, and hopefully we can get them all the way out, but then we also have to make them touch too. So this one's touching, and this one's touching. So at least they're in plane this way. You often see a lot of slight wrecks or something as one of the fork blades jacked up a little bit. So maybe not the best camera angle, but we're going to give her a shot. They do make this big fork alignment tool that you hook on here, and hooks on here and pivots off here, so you can get all this leverage. We'll try this by hand. Oh, that moved way too far. All right. Scary. Push it back in. So a lot of bikes do that. They do nothing, move, or nothing, move, and then move a lot. This is slightly too wide now, which is better than too narrow. This has moved about a millimeter or two, and needs to go another millimeter. This one's still about a millimeter too wide. I'm trying to push just out and not down or up. Hey! We made it. Now they're both just like a millimeter too wide, half millimeter too wide. This one's settled, so it's right where it's supposed to be. This one just another little bit. So So it looks like I'm bending it a lot, but I'm really just flexing it. It's popping right back. Metal's elastic and has a memory. So you got to get it to flex and then move past it where it wants to flex and actually bend just the teeniest bit. And they're both within like a 0.5 millimeter. Better than the margin of error for this tool, I'm sure. And I think this blade's like 1 millimeter up, which, like I said, is probably margin of error, but I'm crazy. Gonna check. It's still touching it here, just totally fine. Maybe we'll come check the top. It'll be easier to see. Just like 1 millimeter. But the whole thing's gonna try and slip. Oh, I think we're there. Touch is the same. Looks the same. Come back down here and double check. Touches both sides here. I think this fork is now aligned. So I'll be able to put this back of the bike and have that wheel slide right up nice and smooth, sit perfectly flush, and not over to one side, not over to the other side. Right dead center on this brake hole. And if it doesn't, then we can get drastic. I don't want to show you that. It's a stock fork. It's probably fine, but sometimes one of these blades is a little more raked than the other, and when you bend it, bend this arm up to make up for it, then all of a sudden the wheel's going to sit crooked because this dropout face where the actual axle sits is like 1 millimeter lower than the other one. 1 millimeter down here will be like 5 millimeters up here. So sometimes if you can't put this in a fork raking tool, like a frame builder fork raking tool, and make them both even and match, sometimes you have to file just like a 0.5 millimeter out of one side of here so the axle can sit up just a little bit more, pulling the wheel back to straight. That's more advanced, more frame builder stuff. If you start doing that before you really understand what you're doing, you're gonna make it worse. Also, some frame builders are sometimes the opposite. They'll come to the other side, just braze in just a little teeny bit of silver or brass, and then file that down to make this sit perfectly straight. So I just stuck the fork back in and just put this top nut on to get it in, just so we can test the wheel. And it goes right in. It's exactly 100 millimeters, maybe 101. But the wheel does sit very slightly crooked, sitting off to this side. And that's because there's one more step to the alignment. This is where you need some real tools. You can get like some Cyclist brand or whatever pretty cheap. You can always find used Park ones. Park made a million of these. These are my old VAR ones, which I love more than anything, and are made to fit every single thing. So on these tools, like the VAR one's nice, because it's 100 millimeters right to this inside, face to face, 100 millimeters across. And then that makes it 120. Moving the first washer in makes it 126, 130, 135 to this outside. So this is cool. The Park ones you have to move and fiddle and adjust this. Some of them are really fiddly. But these are cool. These have also been filed down to fit like the earlier Raleigh forks and things. Old Schwinn, so I have to be careful and make sure I put the round part up in the dropout, not the filed part, because that'll give me a wrong measurement. Or most of the modern ones don't have that. They're only for modern bikes. All the way up, all the way up. Huh. And you can see there's an even gap all the way around. You want to be able to feel it on the sides. So this fork's actually crazy close. I was hoping it was a little more off because the wheel's sitting crooked. But this one, there's a little lip over here. This one's sticking out a little bit. So I've got to bend just this one, just a tad. That's probably too much. Look at it from this angle, and that was lip on the bottom. I'm going to bend it up. Bend this up just a little bit. Trying to make this no lip anywhere. Nice and even. These actually bend pretty soft and easy and are pretty scary most of the time. Okay, we know this thing's aligned. We know this thing's aligned. Stick this wheel in again. All the way up. Now it sits pretty even. Yeah, I'm going to say that's even. So before it definitely stuck out to this side. My eye's almost trying to tell me to stick out the other side a little bit. You can get a real tool and measure this gap. I'm using my fingers to measure, my knuckles from the actual rim surface, the inside of the fork blade, here from the tire too. It's about exactly the same. Sometimes these holes aren't drilled exactly centered, so they'll mess you up and make you think you're off. So you really got to trust your measurements. And it's so close, if you can't feel it and you can't see it, it's close enough. If it does look a little weird, start getting out your measuring gauges. And I usually do like the outside of this rim to the outside of this blade. And that is a measurement, and I'll come to the other side. Make sure it's the same. And it's within a half a millimeter, so close enough. Once you start getting over 2 or 3 or 4, your bike's always going to pull and be weird. Well, I'll do the same thing in the back. I'm going to set them to 120, since the back is now. I come all the way up to where the old axle was with the witness marks in the paint. So really, since this is a sliding dropout, we want to get them about in the same spot. We could do them all the way to the back. The middle, kind of front-ish middle is where the wheel's really going to sit, so that's fine, even though it's a little bit more of a guessing game. It does have these adjuster nuts. We can roll those in to make them the same if we really want to. Looking for that same witness mark where the paint's gone from the axle being bolted on the same spot for years and years and years. Now you can really see it. You can see there's a lip right here, so this one's a little high. A little lip here, so they're not facing each other. And so I'm going to come in, and this is one that moved the most, so this is one that probably needs to move. So I'm going to try and bend it down. I'm going to try and bend this one down by pushing down here and pushing up here. Just a little more, and it looks like there's a little lip right here, so I'm going to come in while I'm doing that a little bit. Ooh. Now if you look, that gap's real tight. No lip anywhere. That's all it takes, that little bit. But if you have these dropouts sitting slightly crooked on your bearings, it's going to put more tension on the tight spot of your bearing. You can make your wheel wear out faster. That's why you get sometimes a cone or a race that's totally dead in one spot and fine in another spot. That's why on forks, the very back side of the crown race wears out the most, because that's where all the real extra pressure is sitting. It's perfect. They're basically 120. It's pretty within a few millimeters centered on the frame. And these guys are aligned, so it's not going to grind on those nice sealed cartridge bearings and destroy them. Now the single speed, there's not a lot to it. We could spend some more time cleaning this frame, wire wheeling off this rust and putting some fresh paint on it. Back in the day, we used to tell people to walk their bike into the makeup counter at a big department store. We have like 7,000 nail polishes. They can find a nail polish that's really close, so you can clean rust spots and hit it with some nail polish and make it pretty subtle. Nowadays, guys just clear coat stuff or spray it with a random whatever color, just don't even care and hit it with some primer. You can't use primer. Primer absorbs water and make it worse. So you gotta at least get a primer sealer or a gray 2-in-1 paint, like a spray paint. If I did braze-ons or cool rack mods, I might just shoot it in silver, tape off some bands and spray some silver bands on, kind of match the Shogun logos. And with this cool silver logo, there's a very good chance I'm going to use silver housing. We spaced it to 120, so it's going to be a single speed now, so I don't really have to worry about it missing braze-ons or having these clamps. So what we got to do is find a bottom bracket. I usually use a 110 bottom bracket, like a Shimano cartridge, and some old Shimano, vintage road or mountain cranks with the chainring usually in the middle position. Mountain sometimes on the outside of the 110 with a road crank as well. The road cranks take like a stock 116, so it only moves them in 3 or 4 millimeters usually. And there's a chart online that says all the Shimano seal cartridge bottom brackets and what their widths are, because a lot of them actually have the same width for the chainring offset. So it's annoying. We'll put like a 110 in and be like, oh, my chain line's bad, it's out like 3 millimeters. You'll get like a 108. You put it on it and it's still out the same 3 millimeters. They're actually both the same on this side, only this side's shorter for whatever reasons, Shimano. So I'm going to find a seal cartridge bottom bracket. I'm going to find some junk cranks sitting around. If think the cranks I want to use on this are like some Sugino ATs that I have on the Bridgestone 400, so it's going to do it all silver build, and I'm going to do it all black build, so those cranks might come off and go on this. They're the ones that I did an alignment video on because the arms were just very slightly bent, making the whole chain ring wah wah wah. So I did glass tabletop measuring alignment for which one's bent and put it in the vise and just barely tweaked it back. So really, wheels, tires, headset, seat and post. Can find some brakes that'll fit. These are nutted, non-recessed, so that'll be a little trickier. Cheapy old brakes or maybe some weird things. Find a stem and a bar. Make it cool. We're really ready to start building it just like that. I mean, like 20, 30 minutes, really an hour and a half of futz around, finding the tools and doing the measurements and trying to cold set it over and over again. So, ready to build. I want to start it right now. I'm not gonna. This video is already running long. I need to edit it way down. But I guess part 2, we will do bottom bracket and cranks, bar and stem, probably the headset. So thanks for watching.